There's a lot to say on this issue. When you guys hear the word transgender, you probably know people that are in your life or people you've seen on TV, or you just see the political realm, whatever it is, and there's a lot of images that come to your mind. I've actually seen Caitlyn Jenner in person. I am going to refer to her as a she. We can talk about whether or not we should use pronouns, he, she, later on, but I'm just going to use a she for now, because when you visually see someone that looks female, your mind immediately thinks she. So for the sake of argument right now, I'm just going to use she with the images that look female, okay? I have seen her in person. She does not look as clean as she is right here. This is heavily airbrushed. When you see her in person, her face looks very made, like she's been stitched together, really. It's not smooth. You can tell that there's a lot of plastic surgery, and she's just a giant. I mean, she's massive, 6 foot, I don't even know, 3, I don't know what she is, but she's just massive. And so this was the big turning point when Caitlyn came out and kind of said, hey, you know what? I'm no longer Bruce, I'm Caitlyn. That turned the tables on so many things, although she has the most interesting views on the LGBTQ community, as a side note anyways. All that to say, I'm going to talk about a range of different things here. I am going to get a little bit into some of what happens with surgeries, because we need to understand what is happening. I'm not going to shelter you from everything. Some things I will, but not from everything, because I think part of what's happening when you talk to people called detransitioners is they will say, nobody told me. Nobody told me before I transitioned what was going to happen. And if I knew, then maybe I wouldn't have done it. And so as a result, I feel like I have the responsibility to then be a part of telling people what really this looks like, because so much of it is kept behind closed doors and people don't really know what's happening. Just really quickly, the media is painting this as a battle between conservatives and liberals, Republicans and Democrats, Christians and non-Christians. That's not what this battle of transgenderism is. Whether you could be a liberal, you can be an atheist, you could be a progressive, and you could be against transgenderism. So there is a bit of just a stereotype that is being played out that actually is not accurate, and we'll get into a little bit of that. But it is not Christians who hold a particular view on transgenderism versus other people in the world who don't. That's not how it is. This is a very fascinating issue, because you'll see that all of the sources that I reference and use are non-Christian sources. I do not use a single Christian source in any of this until I get to the Bible at the end. So everything I tell you is coming from non-Christian journalists. It could be medical, it could be news articles, whatever it is. So they are not advocating a political or a Christian viewpoint. They're advocating a medical or science type viewpoint. So it is not Christians versus the world on this issue. Many people, even in the LGB, the lesbian, gay, bi community, struggle with accepting this particular issue. So first of all, what is gender dysphoria? I need to explain this to you. Gender dysphoria is essentially a disconnect between the sex that you were assigned at birth and the gender feeling or expression that you have, or how you identify. So I'm going to use me as an example throughout of this talk. So I was assigned female at birth, and we can deal with the assigned word later. For sake of argument, I was assigned female at birth, but I identify as a male. I feel like a male. Maybe it's because I enjoy sports, or I enjoy football, or I don't like Barbies, or I like dressing in pants. A lot of those honestly described me honestly as a kid anyways. I was a total tomboy. My poor mother from Jamaica didn't know what to do with this child. Okay, she had me in modeling school. I was in etiquette school. I was in beauty pageants, just fancy dresses. I got all these modeling trophies, and I hated it. All I wanted to do was like ride on my bicycle and fall, because I thought scabs were so cool. Right? She didn't know what to do with this child, right? So that actually, ironically enough, does describe me. But so people maybe say, look, you identify as female, but these are the ways that you express yourself. Therefore, you feel like you are a male. And these feelings are real. Sometimes people want to devalue these feelings, and I don't want to do that. I actually think people genuinely have these feelings. Matthew talked about this earlier, that, you have feelings. They're real. They're valid. Doesn't mean that they're conveying truth, but they're real, and I don't want to belittle that. I don't think everybody's just kind of making things up. I think that we can feel things, but we always need a measuring stick to know, what do we do with those feelings? And so a gender dysphoric person is disconnecting what they were assigned, the sex assigned at birth, and the gender they identify as. So when I say a trans man, I know trans man, trans woman gets so confusing, right? So think about it this way, okay? A trans woman is someone who was born a man and transitioned to a woman, okay? So if you're a woman, you're just called a woman. If you're a trans woman, that means there's a transition to a woman. That can be an easy way to remember it. So you're born male, you transition to a woman, so you're a transitioned woman or trans woman. Same thing with a trans man, born female, transition to being a man, okay? So those terms you can keep in mind with you as we go. So first, let's look at the problem, and so we can get a good overview of like some of the statistics and information about this particular topic and what's actually happening specifically amongst young people, because that's really where we've seen the resurgence in this, or the surgence in this, I should say. So in the US, 1.8% of people under 18 identify as transgender. This is double 5 years prior. So in just a matter of 5 years, we have a complete doubling of the number of people identifying as trans. Now, that may not seem that large, but when you look at something that is double 5 years prior, that's a big deal. If car accidents doubled from 5 years ago, that would be a big deal. We'd be wondering what's going on. In 2010, 150 to 200 trans people were seen yearly at Amsterdam UMC. That number has risen to 775, and there is a 2-year waiting list. From 2016 to 2017, gender surgeries in the US for female to male, that's what FTM is, female to male, increased by 4 times. They now make up 70% of gender surgeries. In 2018, the UK reported a staggering rise in female to male gender treatments of 4,400%. Now, the reason why this is important is because historically, transitioning was a male to female type thing. So a young boy from the ages 2, 3, 4 years old grows up feeling like they're female. They want to wear dresses. They want to wear mommy's heels. They want to wear mommy's makeup, these kind of things. And so they grow up kind of feeling like they're always a female, and then they transition when they're older. Think of Jazz Jennings. How many of you heard of Jazz Jennings, a popular TV show? So there's a few of you in here that have heard of Jazz, okay? That kind of situation. But what's happened is that in recent times, there are now 3 times as many girls as boys who are transitioning. And they're developing dysphoria later on. They're not 2, 3, 4 saying, I'm a boy. It's happening later on, 9, 10, 11, 12, into their teens. The reason why this is fascinating is because before 2012, there was zero scientific literature on girls ages 11 to 21 ever having developed gender dysphoria at all. Not a single study before 2012 that talks about 11 to 21-year-old girls ever having developed gender dysphoria. And now we're seeing them a rise of 4,400% in 2018. Something is going on here. Many of the adolescent girls who become transgender are upper middle class. They do great in school. They're well behaved. They never smoke a cigarette, don't have a boyfriend, or never dated, don't drink. And what they're finding, it isn't so much that they want to be a boy. And with these young teenage girls, it's actually that they just don't want to be a girl. So the issue isn't that they want, so they notice, like when they transition to being boys, they don't all of a sudden want to lift weights. They don't all of a sudden want to watch sports. They don't take on these characteristics. Whereas if you notice a lot of the male to female, think of the male to female adult transitioners you see and how girly they act and behave and the things that they do. They don't see the same thing with the young girls. The issue is that they don't want to be girls. Why? Well, there's a variety of reasons. Some have experienced abuse. Some have come from an abusive background. And if they become a boy, then they can protect themselves. Nobody's going to abuse me if I'm a boy, and I can protect myself in the future. Some are just scared to be women. They're going to be mistreated. Childbirth is going to be horrible. These kind of things that they hear, and they're like, well, I don't want that. I don't want to be a girl. It doesn't sound like it's going to be fun to be a woman. So anything I can do to avoid being a woman, I'll do. Some of them have been bullied for being masculine women. Maybe they're not quite as feminine as the other girls. Maybe they don't like a lot of the same things, and they're bullied. Some are lesbian at young ages. They feel like they are attracted to other women. And so as a result, if they become a man, now they're a man who's attracted to a woman, and they're heterosexual. They're not gay anymore. In fact, this is one of the reasons that the LGB, the lesbian, gay, bisexual community, it's one of the reasons that they have an issue with the transgender movement, because they're concerned that parents are transitioning their kids instead of letting them grow up gay. And so they're like, you're taking these kids out of our community. If you'd left them alone, they would just grow up and be gay. But you don't want them to be gay, so you're transitioning them to the opposite sex. So now they're heterosexual. It's interesting, the whole dynamic between the LGBT community and the T right now. It's very tense. So Lisa Littman, in a 2016 study, she was a former OBGYN, not a Christian. In fact, I think she's Jewish background. She started working in public health, and she noticed on social media that there were several girls that were coming out as men, that they were transitioning, but they would kind of happen, it wasn't just one girl. She would notice that it was like an entire friend group. She's like, well, this is weird. So she started looking into this because it was puzzling. And what she found was that for 65% of these girls, the gender dysphoria came after a long time of being heavily immersed in social media. Probably no surprise there for many of you. So consequently, she formed this hypothesis. She called this whole female to male transitioning with young adolescent girls peer contagion, or what the longer term is rapid onset gender dysphoria, which means it rapidly comes on. It's not like the boys who from 2, 3, 4 years old feel like they're girls. This comes out of nowhere, where all of a sudden they're 12 years old, they're 13 years old, and they're identifying as a male. And the parents are like, whoa, where did this come from? Rapidly onset gender dysphoria. So this is what really helped people to kind of put some of the pieces together here. So let me tell you what she found. She did a survey of 256 parents, and these parents had daughters who experienced rapid onset gender dysphoria. And it was a 90-question survey, and this is what she found. I know a lot of this might be small, so I'm always going to read this to you. This is right. A majority of them had one or more psychiatric diagnoses, and almost half were engaging in self-harm prior to the onset of gender dysphoria. I'm going to go back to the previous slide in just a second. I want to do this first. 60% of parents reported that when their daughter came out as trans, they gave her a popularity boost. That was I'll get to in a second. Over 90% of the surveyed parents were white. Over 85% of the parents supported gay marriage. Remember I said this isn't about liberals or conservatives? Over 88% of parents supported transgender rights. So these are people who are pro-LGBTQ. They're just saying, this isn't my daughter, though. Like something is not quite right with my daughter. When it talks about 90% of the surveyed parents were white, remember I was talking about yesterday, for those of you who were at the banquet, that the critical race theories played a big part in this. This is why we really need to check bad ideas, guys, because we think that we can just hold this bad idea and it just impacts my little circle of people. Wrong. These bad ideas spread, and these young girls have been taught, well, you are part of an oppressive, bad group because you're part of the white upper middle class. There's nothing you can do about it to make amends to other people. And so they feel bad because they're 14. They don't want to be known as like racist or oppressive or whatever. But when they transition, they go from being part of the oppressor group to the oppressed. And they're now the victim, and now people feel bad for them. Now people like them. These are young girls struggling already with being adolescents. Less than 13% of the parents believe that their child's mental health improved after identifying as trans. In fact, 47% said it got worse. Let me read you what I call the golden four. Sweden's Board of Health and Welfare confirmed a 1,500% rise between 2008 and 2018 in gender dysphoria diagnoses amongst 13 to 17-year-olds born as girls. This is what they noticed, and these are four important to remember. 32.4% had diagnoses for anxiety disorder. 28.9% had depression. 19.4% had ADHD. And 15.2% had autism. This is your golden four. Anxiety, depression, ADHD, autism. They find this almost across the board. That these young girls that are struggling with gender dysphoria have at least one of these four, if not two, if not both, is depression and anxiety. Those are really important to remember because as I said in this last thing, less than 30% believe that their child's mental health improved after identifying as trans. In fact, 47% said it got worse. Why do you think it didn't improve? Anybody have any guesses? It's not the real issue. In other words, they have these already existing mental health conditions. People think the solution is to transition them, but they don't get any better because nobody dealt with their mental health transitioning. People say to me all the time, yeah, but if you don't transition somebody, they will commit suicide. Wrong. There are no studies, 0 studies, guys, that say that if you do not transition your child, they will take their life. There's no studies because this hasn't been an issue for long enough for there to be a study. What they're finding is that people who are suicidal post-transition, it's because they're still depressed. They're still anxious. They're still struggling with whatever's going on in their life. And transition didn't fix it. And so now they're really stuck because what they thought was a solution hasn't changed anything. So why does this seem to happen to girls, this rapid onset gender dysphoria? Well, because of the ways that girls relate to each other. Okay? So a young girl comes out, she's in her little friend group, and she comes out and says, you know what, I think I'm trans. And the way the other girls in her group go is girls just take on each other's pain and they empathize with each other. You know, we just hug each other, and if one's crying, we're all gonna cry with you. Like we just all enter into the pain together. That's how we do things. The guys, when a guy group's together and one guy comes out and say, hey, I think I'm a female, the other guys are like, okay, cool, let's go play basketball. Like, they're just not going to get all emotional and tell me more about your feelings. Like, they just don't do that, right? Hold each other's hands, right? Girls, we do all that kind of stuff. And so essentially you take on each other's. That's what young girls do. I see some young girls in this audience, and I don't know if they're on TikTok, but many people might see that there's this whole thing on TikTok where these young girls are picking up these little ticks. Have any of you heard of this? Any young girls heard of this kind of thing? Okay. So what's happening is they're seeing some people have tics on like TikTok, and so Tourette's syndrome basically, and the girls are watching it, and so all of a sudden they have tics too. And so they just take on everybody else's pain and what they're dealing with. So Amanda Rose, who's a professor of psychology at the University of Missouri, says, girls are willing to suspend reality to get into their friends' worlds more. For this reason, adolescent girls are more likely to take on, for instance, the depression their friends are going through and become depressed themselves. Rapid onset gender dysphoria is just another example of peer contagion or social contagion. This is actually why they won't house anorexics in a hospital in a group close by. When anorexic is in the hospital, they keep them separate because they feed off of each other and they support each other. And they will encourage each other. It's just the way that young girls function. So normal teen behavior is that they want to be in the group, and transitioning gives them the opportunity to do that. So let me walk you through what the chronology of transition looks like. Now that you understand the rise and the increase of it, you understand some of the different causes of it, social contagion, maybe a history of abuse, maybe they're scared to be a woman, maybe they're really gay and they don't want to be, whatever it is. You've seen that. You've seen the effects of the girl groups on each other. Let me tell you the way that the general pattern as to where this goes. So I'm a 12-year-old girl. I am entering into puberty. It's already an awkward thing for many young girls. I was an athlete, and up until 8th grade, I remember the girls and the boys were like the same length. Like I was the girl that got picked to be on the boys' dodgeball team because I could always catch the balls. So they didn't mind picking me. I couldn't throw them. I would literally catch them and throw them to the guys because the guys could just whip them. I never had that kind of arm, right? So I would just catch them and then I'd toss them and then they would just whip them, right? So I was good. I played boys hockey for high school. That was a whole different kind of thing because that's when they got bigger. But up until middle school, 8th grade, we were pretty much even, okay? The girls are hitting their growth spurt, they're doing their thing, everybody's growing, we're good. And then something happens with boys in between 8th and 9th grade, and we came back for 9th grade high school, and they had started going like this, right? So the girls, all of a sudden, puberty's different. You're starting to like boys, and maybe you're not pretty enough. Maybe your hair isn't what you want, and maybe you're not as tall. Maybe you're shorter. Maybe you've got acne, whatever it is. So you kind of don't like yourself as is anyways in puberty. So you're already uncomfortable. So next thing you know, you're on social media. And you see people on social media that say the reason why you don't like yourself is because you're a boy. The thing is, I was like you. I didn't like myself either. But when I transitioned to being a boy, then I liked myself. You just need to transition and you'll be as happy as me. So these young girls are heavily influenced by social media. The links between transgenderism and young girls and social media are already there. We already know because they are telling us that social media, Reddit, TikTok, these things played a huge part. YouTube played a huge part in them transitioning because they thought that's what would make them happy. So they start to change their name, maybe their clothes. And then they tell the parents, or maybe they don't. It means they just tell the school, whatever. There's a whole debate there, disagreement there. But either way, they change their name and clothes. Then they tell the parents, okay, I think I'm a boy. And the parents are like, what? Wait, I don't know what to do with this. This doesn't make any sense. So the parents say, I'm going to take you to the experts. And they send them to the psychologist. Well, the psychologists are a little bit handcuffed right now as to what they're allowed to say. So after usually one visit, maybe two, but I've heard one over and over again, they say, okay, you think you're trans? That's fine. I'm going to send you to the endocrinologist. And they get passed to the endocrinologist. The endocrinologist puts them on puberty blockers. And that has a whole nother set of things, which I will get to in a second. And then they go from puberty blockers to, after a certain amount of years on puberty blockers, because puberty blockers just stop puberty wherever it is. You no longer puberty wherever it was continuing, it just stops right there. Then they go on and they put them on testosterone or estrogen, depending if they're male or female. And then after a certain amount of time on that, then if they want to, they can go and get surgery. And that's the kind of the general depression. So you're going through puberty, you're depressed, you're anxious, you're ADHD, you got autism, you don't like yourself, whatever it is, you change your name, change your clothing, because TikTok and the social media world tells you you're going to be happy if you do these things. Your friends are starting to transition too, so you got that going on. Your parents send you to the psychologist. After one visit, maybe two, they send you to get puberty blockers with endocrinologists. After a few years of that, or maybe a couple months or a year or so of that, depending, you get on cross-sex hormones, testosterone or estrogen, and then surgery. So that's kind of the general pattern of how this works. Parents are told puberty blockers are reversible. That is a lie, because we have never given puberty blockers in mass doses to young adolescents like that. So therefore, we haven't conducted any studies on young adolescents that we give puberty blockers to. Therefore, we don't know that there's no permanent effect, because we've never done studies, because we've never done this before. We have, and I'm forgetting the name of it right now, but there is a puberty blocker that they do give to 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds, young girls, if they do start their periods early. That is one that they have been doing, but it's 1 year. You get 1 year. The medical community will buy you 1 year, and that kind of thing. But this long-term kind of thing we've never done before. So parents are told if they don't support their child will take their life. And the famous line is, would you rather have a live son or a dead daughter? So I'll use me. I'm coming in. I want to transition. And the doctors say to my parents, would you rather have an alive son or a dead Alycia? And the parents are scared out of their minds. They don't know what to do. And nobody wants to feel like they're responsible for their child not being here. And so they give in. The closest study we have to what the suicide rates are in regards to transition is when we look at the Tavistock Clinic, which was in the UK. It's now being, it's shutting down, but it's kind of like defragmenting. The Tavistock was the gender clinic in the UK. It was the big one that they had. And they basically have found that there's so many problems there with it that what they're doing is essentially shutting that down and making it into smaller clinics. And then the UK basically is pulling back actually on puberty blockers and all of those things for young kids now. They're like, this is not working. I think Sweden and Finland have already started doing that as well. But Tavistock had 15,032 patients over the years that it was around, which is, I think, over 20 years. 15,032 patients. Of that 15,032, 4 committed suicide. 2 were actually getting treatment. The other 2 were on the waiting list. So to tell parents that if you don't do this, that if you don't transition them, they will commit suicide is a bold-faced lie. It's so cruel to do to a parent who's trying to figure out, how do I help my hurting and crying child? 4 out of 15,032 is not a guarantee. And 2 of them were getting treatment. I need to spend a little bit of time going into the effects of puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones. I think it's important for you to know what they do, because this is where people are saying, I didn't know. I didn't know. And so I need you to know. Puberty blockers, Lupron is the most popular one that's used to stop puberty in children. It delays sexual development. Wherever the child was when they took Lupron, it stops them right there. It also slows bone growth and affects your height. So Finland and Sweden have stopped using puberty blockers on kids because of long-term effects like bone density loss. We're finding teenage girls with osteoporosis. This is actually really new because I think this was just recent, in the past maybe couple months, that this happened with Finland and Sweden, and now the UK pulling back. And it kind of is like Finland and Sweden was kind of the first ones to do it. Then it goes to the UK to affirm transgender. Then it goes to Canada to affirm transgender. And then it comes to us. So now we're seeing Finland and Sweden kind of pulling back on it. We're seeing the UK pulling back on it. Hopefully next is Canada, and then it's us. We're usually the last one in the game, but it looks like it's moving in that direction. Regardless, that's what puberty blockers do. Cross-sex hormones, estrogen or testosterone. Here's what we need to understand. A young girl who takes testosterone automatically within a short period of time feels better. The reason is because testosterone relieves anxiety and depression. And remember what I told you about the golden 4? Depression, anxiety, autism, and ADHD? They're already most likely struggling with anxiety or depression or something. So they take testosterone, it immediately calms that down, and they immediately say, see, transitioning is what I needed, I already feel better. But that's just a natural effect of the testosterone. It also leads women to be more bold and unafraid. So if you're one of those young girls that were getting bullied, try and bully her now. Makes you more courageous. However, it can affect short-term memory. It increases moodiness. It increases irritability. It causes the blood to thicken, causes muscle aches, increased sweating, aggression, and even cancer. And this is an important thing for people to understand. One of the reasons why you may have heard of young girls getting hysterectomies at such young ages, because after a certain period of time on testosterone, you significantly increase your risk of endometrial cancer. It is true. And so what doctors advise is, so that you don't get cancer, let's go ahead and remove your reproductive organs so that you don't run the risk of getting cancer. And so young girls at 17, 18 are like, well, I don't even want to have a baby anyways. I'm transitioning to be a boy. I'm not going to be a mother. And they go ahead and get the surgery. Additionally, I need to let you know that testosterone is very good, and it is what is supposed to be helping young boys become men. And testosterone has its effect on doing a lot of great things, helping young boys become teenage men and adult men with growing beards and all of these kind of things. Readjusting the fat and this kind of stuff around their bodies so that the way the fat is dispersed between women and men is different. Testosterone plays a large part in that. But additionally, testosterone fulfills its role in women that it does in men. And so it causes the genitalia of young women to grow, because that's what testosterone does in young men. And nobody tells some of these young girls that when all of a sudden they realize something isn't right anymore. After cross-sex hormones, even if you stop taking testosterone, even if you stop taking estrogen, the effects can be permanent. So after testosterone, after just I think 3 months, the effects are permanent on testosterone, just 3-4 months. So if I'm on testosterone 3-4 months and my facial hair starts to grow, it will always be there, even when I stop taking it. Body hair will always be there. even if I stop taking it. That is irreversible. The changes in your voice are always going to be there. The changes in your vocal cords, that won't go away. That is permanent as well. What it's done to her, the masculinization of her face, there's a shifting of the body fat where their face becomes broader. And I'm not sure if it's they think it's the fat. Once again, we don't have all the studies on this stuff yet because this is all very new. So is the fat, this seems like the fat deposits are shifting to make it more broader, and these kind of things are muscular shapes are changing and this kind of stuff. All of those things are permanent, even when you leave testosterone. So things have started to go very, very wrong here, friends. And I want to read you, a Twitter message, actually, from a young girl. Her name, I shouldn't say that. It's a male to female to male, back to male again. And his name is Tulip Richie. The only way I know him, that's his Twitter name, is Tulip Richie. And transitioned older, I want to say maybe more 20s, not younger, transitioned to being a female, and then transitioned back to being a male, because now there is this whole movement of what's called detransitioners, where people who have transitioned are now learning, hey, I transitioned 5-6 years ago, and I'm not happy yet. What they're finding is that when people transition, they're happy for the first couple of years, but then they're not happy anymore. And now they've done these irreversible changes to their body. And now they're even more depressed, because remember, their mental health was never treated at all. So they've carried that depression, they've carried that anxiety, they carried all this stuff with them, and now they're even more upset because they look down at their body and they don't like what they've done, because what they're finding is that when you hit your mid-20s, all of a sudden you like yourself. That's why they say if you just leave kids alone, we get that they don't like themselves right now, but just leave them alone, because when they hit their mid-20s, all of a sudden they're okay with themselves. And so what happens is these young girls now are getting older and they're hitting their mid-20s and they're like, oh, what have I done? All of a sudden I want to be a mom. I didn't want to be a mom 10 years ago, but I want to be a mom. In fact, I have a friend right now who was married in a lesbian marriage, has come out of that, has given her heart to the Lord, and all of a sudden she wants to be a mom. That wasn't there before. She's in her 30s. People all of a sudden are saying, I want to be a mom, and they look down at their bodies and they've had things removed. Or they don't know the effect of the testosterone, even if they haven't. Can they still even have kids? And now they're even more depressed. Now they're even more anxious. Now the damages have been done to their body and they're permanent. And I want to read you a little bit of Tulip Richie's, what he shared on Twitter. I know you can't see it, it's really small. I'm going to read it for you. He says, I want to tell everyone what they took from us, what irreversible really means, and what that reality looks like for us. No one told me any of what I'm going to tell you now. I have no sensation in my crotch region at all. You could stab me with a knife and I wouldn't know. The entire area is numb, like it's shell-shocked and unable to comprehend what happened even 4 years on. What he's talking about is that he went on to have female surgery, genitalia surgery, to turn him from male to female. And so he had genitalia reconstruction to be female. So that's what he's talking about here. And he's saying that it's numb. He can't feel anything. That's something that will never come back. And one of the reasons why I got surgery. My sex drive died about 6 months on hormone replacement therapy. And at the time, I was glad to be rid of it. But now 10 years later, I'm realizing what I'm missing out on and what I won't get back. It says, then there's the dreams. I dream often that I have both sets of genitals. In the dream, I'm distressed. I have both. Why both, I think? I tell myself to wake up because I know it's just a dream, and I awaken into a living nightmare. In those moments of amnesia, as I would wake, I'd reach down to my crotch area, expecting something to be there that was there for 3 decades. Once again, he transitioned much older, around his 30s, but it's not there. And then there's the act of going to the toilet. It takes me about 10 minutes to empty my bladder. It's extremely slow and painful. And because it dribbles, no matter how much I relax, it will then just go all over the entire area, leaving me soaked. So after cleaning myself up, I'll find moments later on that my underwear is wet. No matter how much I've wiped, it slowly drips out for the best part of an hour. I never knew that at 35, I ran the risk of smelling like pee everywhere I went. Now I get to the point where I'm detransitioned, and the realization that this is permanent is catching up with me. During transition, I was obsessive and deeply unwell. I cannot believe they were allowed to do this to me, even after all the red flags. I wasn't even asked if I wanted to free sperm or if I wanted kids. In my obsessive, deeply unwell state, they just nodded along and didn't tell me the realities, what life would be like. So God help us. What do we do? I know this is really heart-wrenching stuff. And I think part of what grieves us is to know that for so many people, it is what's happening to our children. These aren't always grown adults, but these are people that nobody gave them the full truth. They're experimenting on our kids. This is why even Richard Dawkins, the world's most popular atheist, as I was saying yesterday, is like, what's wrong with humanity? This is basic biology. You cannot become the other sex. Even the world's most famous atheist recognizes that. So God help us. What do we do? Well, the argument is framed, and Matthew and I think even Mike talked about this morning. The argument is framed that our emotions and feelings are telling us that our bodies got it wrong, that we should be listening to the feelings. But the problem is that feelings can be misleading. Classic example of this is phobias, right? So if I'm up here speaking and a spider goes across the front, me and like half the women in here scream and like move out of our seats, right? The reality is I should use a cockroach, because honestly, that's what freaks me out now that I live in the South. There are these huge giant palmetto bugs. Like, I lose my marbles. It is literally on my thing of like, what's look for in a husband? Do you kill bugs? Because we both can't be scared, right? Somebody has to save me from these things, right? So it comes from along, right? And my body just freaks out. The reality is I can walk faster than it. I can run faster than it. You don't have to freak out, Alycia. You're going to be just fine. But everything my body's telling me, run, danger, mayday, this is bad. My feelings, which are real, are telling me to be fearful. But then my mind has to kick in and say, hold on, you're okay. Let's calm you down. That is basic psychotherapy. When you go to see a therapist for something you're dealing with, they're constantly trying to help you use your brain to check your emotions and calm you. In other words, yes, we have these feelings about our body. Yes, we have these feelings about who we might be, but we need something to tell us what to do about those feelings. Should we listen to those feelings? What are they communicating? What should we avoid? Etc. We need a lens through which to filter this through. And this is what I was saying last night. Richard Dawkins, you did this to people because you took away their source that tells them how to interpret their feelings. So they're using themselves and tearing their bodies to shreds. And people don't know what to do. Some people say, well, look, I have a female brain in a male body. Well, that's actually not possible. This is why. And I'll just paraphrase this. Well, I can read it to you. It says around 7 weeks, if the embryo is male, basically what happens is the testosterone, I'll skip all this because it'll take me too long. Basically what happens is in utero, when you are forming XX or XY, if you're XY, you're male, and so you've got testosterone. We both have testosterone, but men have way higher levels than women do. And the testosterone doesn't just help form the internal and external parts of a male, it also changes their brain. In other words, at 7 to 8 weeks in utero, your brain has become masculinized because of the testosterone. And this is from a woman named Dr. Deborah Sow, who wrote the book, The End of Gender. She considers herself not just an atheist, but more liberal than Bernie Sanders. Once again, these aren't Christians. So the brain is masculinized before birth ever even happens. The synaptic patterns are different in men and women. The neurons density is different. Men's brains are 10% larger than female brains, although I'm sorry to tell you that doesn't impact intelligence, but they are 10% larger than female brains. That happens before baby is even born. Dr. Paul Brand, who is one more thing I said before I get to Dr. Paul Brand is I want to make one other point. Part of my struggle with this whole topic is that essentially when I see somebody like Caitlyn Jenner, he says, I want to be a woman, and so here's what I need to do to be a woman. I'm going to put on a tight dress. I'm going to grow my nails. I'm going to grow my hair and dye my hair. I'm going to put on some good makeup, put on some heels, and now I'm a woman. And ladies, what has Bruce Jenner just said about what makes you you? Your little skinny body, the length of your nails, your hair length, whether you wear makeup. And in so doing, he has just undone 50 some odd years of the feminist movement, which says that women are more than just their physical bodies. Think about how ultra feminine many of the adult male transitioners to women are. They are like, I've been a woman for 43 years. And even I don't walk around like, kind of thing, right? It's like this ultra feminized woman. It's fascinating to me. And I'm interested to see when, 5 years on the road, 10 years on the road, when we go through these studies and we find out what's really going on here, why is that their image of a woman? What have we done? What are we saying about who women are? That's part of the problem here. I think it's insulting to me as a woman, or insulting to us as women, to say that all I need to do is put on a tight dress and some long hair and some heels, and all I have is become you, because that's all there is to you. It's degrading. This is why I will use the pronouns, like I said with Caitlyn, I'll call her she, but people like Dylan Mulvaney, if you guys know who Dylan Mulvaney is on the Bud Light can, just basically brought down the Bud Light company. Male to female transition, or Bud Light was the #1 beer in America until they put Dylan Mulvaney on the front of that can, and he tanked them because everybody boycotted them at the same time they were boycotting Target. So they've lost their #1 status, which they had for like 30 years. Bud Light was #1 beer in this country until they put Dylan Mulvaney on that can. But Dylan parades himself around like, in like little tiny bathing suits and things like that. He makes a mockery of us. I will never call him a she. He will be a he, because he just mocks us with what he does. Secondly, if the feeling is truth, if you're saying, my body got it wrong, my feeling is what's real, I'm going to use me again, I feel like I'm a boy, that is what's real, my body got it wrong. If the feeling is real and that's what I'm going to listen to and the body's what's wrong, then why am I transitioning at all? Because if the feeling is real, then I'm already a boy. Why do I need to go through the transition process if the feeling is real? And the feeling is valid, and the feeling is true, and the feeling is right. All that testosterone and surgeries, none of that changes the feeling. So what we do is in the beginning, we say, hey, you know what? My body got it wrong. My feelings are right. There's a disconnect. I don't trust the body because the body doesn't get things right. I trust my feelings. But then unconsciously, we raise the body and we say the body does matter because we go and we get surgery to change the body to make it in line with their feelings. And on the front end, we said the body didn't matter. On the back end, we said the body does. And that's why it's not enough for me just to have a feeling. I have to line up my body with that feeling. You're affirming that the body does matter the minute you get surgeries, the minute you go on puberty blockers, the minute you put cross-sex hormones into your body. You're saying the physical does matter, but you threw it away in the beginning, but now you raise it at the end. So which is it? Does it matter or does it not? And I definitely don't know what it means to feel like a woman. People say, well, I feel like a woman, I feel like a man. I don't even know what that means. I don't have a woman feeling. And even if I did have a feeling, like a woman feeling, how can I say to somebody, I know what it's like to be a man? Imagine me going to somebody and saying, I know what it's like to be Chinese. I know what it's like to be 6'10". Like, what are you talking about? You've never been me. How do you know the feeling that you're feeling is a 6'10" feeling? How do you know the feeling that you're feeling is the Chinese feeling? Like, how do I know that this feeling I'm feeling is telling me I'm a man? Like, how do I know what that feeling is? The reality is, our bodies are good. And yes, we do live in a broken world, but it's almost as if God, in his infinite wisdom, knew that we would be struggling. In Genesis chapter 1, the very first chapter of the Bible, he tried to give us clarity to our confusion. And it says this in verse 27. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. They were created male and female, not God. God is in both male and female. He created them, male and female. And then in Mark 10, it says, but at the beginning of creation, God made them, male and female, for this reason. A man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one. God knew we'd be confused, whether we were male or female. And in Genesis chapter 1, when you look at that word in Hebrew, created, it means to shape or to form male or female. In other words, what it's saying is that is a physical description of creating or forming male or female, which means your male or femaleness has nothing to do with your feelings. It's everything to do with your physical biology. That is what determines whether you are male or female. Dr. Paul Brand, and I'll end here. Dr. Paul Brand was a medical doctor and spent a lot of time working with leprosy patients in India. Wrote a fantastic book with Philip Yancey called In His Image and the Likeness of God, something like that. I love Philip Yancey, he's my favorite author. But while he was in Paul Brand working with leprosy patients, he studied the skeletons of some 600 people, and they had died from leprosy. And while studying the bones, he talks about things that you can learn from bones. Listen to some things that he says that you can learn. He says, from the size of the pelvis, just a bone, from the size of the pelvis, you can tell whether or not it's male or female. When a pelvis is shallow and broad with an inner ring that's smooth, it belongs to a woman. A man's pelvis is more narrow. It's heart-shaped and is formed with heavier bones. The woman's pelvis, though, has a unique opening which matches the size and the shape of a baby's head. So just from looking at the bones, Dr. Brand can tell a lot about whether it's male or female. You see archaeologists do this all the time, right? They do a dig, and they can tell by looking at the skeletons whether it's male or female, because the bone structures are different. But then Dr. Paul Brand goes on to add a very interesting point that I think is beneficial to our culture. It's going to be small, so I'll read it. He says, the female runner still lags behind the male, and blame rests on the pelvis. The projections on the man's pelvis allow for more powerful muscles, but a woman equipped with them could not bear a child. Similarly, a man's hip sockets are closer together, narrower the center of gravity, which enables more efficient movement. If a woman's were similarly designed, there'd be no room for the baby's head to extrude. So the odd pelvic bone represents a summation of many different requirements. When a woman wishes she could run faster or sway less or have a narrower base, let her know that the survival of the human race depends on her being just the shape she is. We live in a society today that tells us to be unhappy with ourselves. Beauty is defined by culture. Ladies, do you know why you shave your legs? Because back in the 1920s, Gillette razor said, you know what? We can make a whole lot more money if we get women to shave too. And they formed a massive marketing campaign to find a way to get women to use razors. And it worked. Our culture defines beauty for us so often. But the reality is who better to ask about the beauty of the design than the person who made it, who can tell you whether you're male or female, who can clear up the confusion you have about who you are, and can help you to see yourself as beautiful, even if you aren't walking around in high heels, or even if you can't bench 250 pounds. None of that has any bearings on your beauty or your value or your worth. And while it can be so hard to like ourselves in a culture, man, that is just bonkers, if we can refocus ourselves on the truth of who we are and tune that out, we will be much more at peace, because those who listen to that end up so much worse on the other end. Stacey Eldridge said this on Facebook a couple years back. She says, "It breaks my heart when women look at the sky and think, wow, God is amazing, but look in the mirror and say, ugh, as if he did not make both." One final point, and then I got to let you guys go here to the next thing. Just so you know, the world is starting to change their view of transgenderism. As I've said to you, everybody that I reference, except for the God piece, everybody that I reference is either not a Christian, or at least I have no idea what faith they are. But many people in mainstream culture are saying there's something wrong here, and we need to do something about it. I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and to be frank and honest with you, I watched the church handle the LGB, the lesbian, gay, bi movement extremely poorly. I watched how we mocked people who are gay. I watched how people rejoice over them getting AIDS. We don't rejoice, guys, over the death of someone who is in illness. How do we rejoice over that when the Bible literally says in Romans 5:8 that God demonstrates love for us? While we were sinners, he died for us. He saw sinners and he died for them. We see sinners and we say, you deserve it. Who are we? I remember being 18, 19, watching this nonsense and being so disgusted with the church and saying, how could this be right? How could it be like this? I had one person tell me, because I was involved in prison ministries, I went into prison starting at 18 years old, juvenile detention centers, maximum security prisons. Alycia, it's so amazing what you do. You go into prisons. That's so amazing. You're doing the work of God. But yet the same person wouldn't go visit their sister because she was a lesbian. I don't want that spirit to jump on me. Stop. That is not Christ-like. I'm dealing with rapists and murderers and people who've done horrific things, and that's the work of God, but you can't visit your own family member? As the culture begins to turn its back on the transgender movement, guys, will we make the same mistakes we made in the 80s and 90s, where they know the church hates me too? The church mocks me, they criticize me, they talk bad about me? Or can we for once be Christ-like to broken, hurting people? They're not saved. Why would we expect them to act any different? And as the culture turns their back on him, my prayer is that the church will do this right for once. And they will know, man, those Christians, they never agreed with me. But maybe I can go to them because nobody in the culture will be my friend anymore. And maybe I can be friends with them. Maybe there's a little bit of love left in them. And that is my prayer for us as a church. This is all good to learn about, and I hope you use it in speaking to people around you. But ultimately, let's not make the same mistakes we made before with the LGBT community. Please, let's be Christ-like to a community that is having the culture turn its back on them rapidly, and maybe, just maybe, they could find a home here with us.